And viewers, let's give you news on the Japan-China feud. Now, China has intensified its criticism of Japan, submitting a formal letter to the United Nations condemning Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's recent remarks on Taiwan. In the letter, China's UN envoy Fu Kong has accused Takaichi of making erroneous and dangerous statements by linking a potential Taiwan contingency to Japan's security, something Beijing says no Japanese leader has done in an official setting since 1945. Fu has said the comments amounted to Japan signaling possible military involvement in the Taiwan issue, which he described as a threat of force against China. Beijing has said it raised objections repeatedly with Tokyo but received no retraction. The letter argues that Japan's position isolates international law, undermines the post-war order, and alarms Asian countries once affected by Japanese militarism. Beijing also urged Japan to reflect on its historical responsibilities and stop what it views as provocative actions. The letter will be circulated to all UN member states as an official General Assembly document. And we now have Andrew K.P. Luong, who is a China strategist, joining us live from Hong Kong to share his opinion on the issue. Welcome to you and thanks for joining us on this bulletin on NewsX World. Now, I just want to ask you a very straightforward questions. Could you just help us firstly spell out China's concerns that it's going to raise at the United Nations Forum?
Well, of course, I've explained the dynamics surrounding Taiwan on many occasions on this channel. I'll just focus on this latest Chinese government move to send a complaint to the United Nations. Now, this elevated this issue to international law. But of course, if you look at the map, or you can Google, the distance between Japan and Taiwan is 1,333 miles, or over 2,400 kilometers. So if there is a in case there is a conflict in Taiwan, would it constitute an existential threat to Japan? That, of course, is debatable. So that's a very important point, because you can say that what's happened in the Antarctica could threaten your own national security. I mean, to stretch a point. But on the other hand, of course, the Taiwan occupies a very strategic position in the Asia Pacific. And of course, the United States also has expressed also have provisions in the so-called 5 assurances, and also the 3 communiques and the Taiwan Relations Act, opposing any unilateral use of force to change the status quo. But of course, neither Japan nor the United States recognize Taiwan as a country, because Taiwan has already been de-recognized as a country at the time of President Nixon's visit. But of course, that international law is not everything. For example, President Trump recently wanted to send troops to even Sudan because the Sudanese were killing Christians. So it's just like the Crusades, you know. I mean, so international law is not be all and end all. But of course, the Japanese government has reinterpreted its own wartime constitution, and then making it legal for so-called collective self-defense. But what is legal within Japan doesn't necessarily meaning that it complies with international law, because under and also the laws of diplomacy, normally expects that countries do not interfere with other countries' internal affairs, and all these principles are enshrined in the United Nations. But now we live in a world which is not governed by international law, is governed by self-interest, is governed by a lot of geopolitics, is governed by exertion of their own internal agenda. You can just look at what President Trump is doing, with his tariffs, sanctioning and rattling the whole world's supply and value chain. But of course, the biggest misunderstanding is that as if Beijing is going to invade Taiwan anytime soon, without realizing that it's always been Beijing's primary objective to achieve unification by peaceful means, by people-to-people exchanges, by military deterrence, by economic pressures, so as to push Taiwan towards the negotiation table. And then, of course, the peaceful means for the future of Taiwan is also complies with the United States Taiwan Relations Act and the so-called 3 communiques on the Taiwan issue, or the 5 assurances. Americans' position still remains that the United States doesn't recognize Taiwan as a country, does not take sides on how the future of Taiwan is going to be negotiated. It only opposes the use of force. However, Beijing is not putting force as the primary measure. In fact, it's only a contingency. Beijing always wants Taiwan to be reunited peacefully, and that's the wishes of the people on both sides. So there was a lot of twisted rhetoric, a lot of national self-interest, and as far as Japan is concerned, you have a new administration which is very hawkish, which is a revisionist, and wants to revise the Japanese wartime constitution to enable Japan to rearm itself. And of course, the Beijing wants to send this signal to the United Nations to warn other countries not to interfere in this what Beijing regards as the internal matter. Apart from the fact that, of course, a lot of the countries still do not realize how much importance Beijing places on achieving this aim through peaceful unification. And that's why it's promoting people-to-people exchanges and providing more opportunities for Japanese young people to seek their opportunities on the mainland. So I think that's that kind of development complies with what the United States policy on Taiwan all along.
But given that Takaichi is now pursuing closer relationship with Trump and the United States, and that she has pledged to increase defense spending in Japan, how soon can we expect that happening?
Well, of course, as far as the President Trump is concerned, he wants other countries to increase the defense spending to at least 3%, if not 5%. The United States defense spending is more than 5%. President Trump regards that the American system is being milked by other countries, riding on Americans' military umbrella without paying their due share. And that's why the United States wants the European countries to increase their defense spending, and likewise, the United States wants Japan to increase their defense spending. And of course, increasing their defense spending also means purchases of American armament. So the Trump administration is going to make more money out of that. But of course, it's also regarded as a fair sharing of responsibilities. So I think that the Japan, of course, houses the American military forces, and also with the first island chain centered in Okinawa, second island chain centered in Guam, lots of American assets. So the Trump administration is exerting pressure on Japan to increase their military spending.
All right, and at the UN itself, what kind of support should China be expecting from other member states?
Could you repeat your question? What support?
I wanted to ask you, given that China is sending this letter out at the UN, what are the nations that China is expecting to side with it on the issue?
Well, I think that many countries do not want a war between China and Japan because that's likely to drag in the United States at some point. It's going to rattle the stability of the region. So regardless of the legality, countries do not want this kind of hawkish rhetoric. So that's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is that the Beijing wants to send this letter to the United Nations, knowing that it's going to be circulated to all other countries. So it serves as a warning to other countries not to follow suit, because don't forget that in the Asia Pacific, the United States has got forming military alliance to counter China. You have the so-called Quad with India and Japan and Australia. You have the AUKUS, the Australian nuclear submarine deal. And recently there is a closer military partnership between Japan and South Korea, between Japan and the Philippines. So countries in the region are involved there in any way. But of course, there are other countries, for example, in Europe, and they also took part in the so-called freedom of navigation. And even NATO, at one point, was talking about expanding their influence to the Asia Pacific, because they thought, well, the argument is that what happens in the Asia Pacific affects the security in Europe. I mean, you can stretch the point. As I said, I mean, you can say that what happened in Antarctica would threaten the security in your country. So I think that the sending of this letter serves different purposes. Warning to Japan, a kind of warning to other nations, and raising this issue about regional stability, so that other countries can also chip in as a counterweight against Japan's revisionism.
All right, I thank you for joining us and sharing your opinion with us here on NewsX World. Without viewers, let's move on. Now, an independent